there, my name is Kara, and today on the art account we're going to talk about art. Shocker! We're going to talk about how to look at art, what to look for when you go into a museum, and why you should be taking a little bit more time to look at art in a more worldly way, more informed way, and why that's more helpful to you in the long run than just walking into a museum and going, Art, according to dictionary.com. Art is the class of objects subject to aesthetic criteria, works of art collectively as paintings, sculptures, or drawings. I consider it more to be the tangible expression of what we as humans experience in our lifetimes. We make art to talk about things we want to be, we make art to talk about things we've experienced, coping mechanisms, and maybe sometimes poor coping mechanisms, and to tell other people's about our story, pretty much. Today, let's talk about aesthetics. I want you to play like the vaporwave.
Yes.
The what is it? How does it go?
Yes.
As said by R.G. Collingwood, aesthetic theory is not the theory of beauty, but of art. So the Greek definition of aesthetic is generally translated to what pertains to the senses. So, freaking alert, art doesn't have to be pretty at all. Art doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to make sense to you. It just has to do with your senses and what you experience. It can be ugly. You don't have to like every piece of art you see. And I think that's a really big misconception, is that you're supposed to go into a museum or gallery and you're supposed to like everything you see, but you don't have to. In fact, in my personal opinion, I think it shows more depth of personality when you dislike art. I think it takes a lot to say, I don't like the way this is done, and being able to find a reason, a true tangible reason why you don't like art or a single piece of art. I think that shows a lot more character than saying, this is all pretty, I like it, you know? So I think that shows a lot more like creativity of the mind when you can say, I don't like this because of this, this, and this. So never think that because you don't think something's pretty, you're not appreciating it. So I think that liking something and appreciating something are two different things, almost, in a way, if that makes sense. The other thing about art is that you can go to an art gallery with your friend and you don't have to agree. Even if you're, I don't know, an engineering major and your friend is an art major, and they say, oh, I love this Matisse or whatever, and you go, what the hell, this is like not that cool of a painting, I don't really enjoy it, I don't really like it. It's okay not to agree on art. It is okay to not understand how someone can like something, because art is perceived from person to person. You know, art is literally just an experience of the senses. So every single person experiences something different. The way a cinnamon roll tastes to me is not the way a cinnamon roll tastes to someone else. And that's just the way our senses work. No two people are the same, just as no two art pieces are the same, and your taste is never going to be the same as someone else's. So we're going to talk about visual analysis, which is just kind of, if you were to walk up to a piece of art, it could be a sculpture, a piece of photography, or a painting, or an illustration, or any kind of the classical types of art. You're going to want to look at these paintings and go through these kind of steps and trying to, you go through these really easy, simple steps so that eventually you can come to a deeper meaning about it and then form an educated opinion about a piece of art. So the first piece of visual analysis I'm going to talk about is color. Color is literally the way the cells in your eyes perceive wavelengths of light. So again, color to you has different meanings, and it has a literally different look than the person next to you, even if it's just slightly, barely even noticeable. art, because of color, will look different to different people. Vibrancy is different to different people, so it's not perceived exactly the same person to person. So the other words we usually talk about when we're talking about color is value, which means light or dark. So going from whites to blacks, that kind of in between, that's your value. Chroma, which is like the intensity of the color, a pastel versus a really vibrant color. You know, when you talk about a yellow tulip versus a sunflower, those are both yellow, but their vibrancy is completely different. So that's what we call chroma. And then we also talk about hue, which is like a magenta is part of the pink family and a part of the red family. And, you know, orange is a part of the red family and the yellow family. So that's kind of what we talk about when we talk about hue, what is its closest primary or secondary color when you're talking about a specific color. Colors can help change the mood. They can be big for symbolizing things. Definitely a big help with helping you understand the subject of a painting. Okay, so we're gonna talk about form, which is basically like, it's a really easy concept to understand, but hard to kind of define because form is a shape, a completion of lines, a completion of strokes that make up a form. Like my hand is a form. Her face on this is a form. So she is a form on this, but she's also sitting on top of what we would consider a two-dimensional form. And so this as itself, as a plane, is a two-dimensional piece of art. But when looked at like this, with this is now a three-dimensional piece of art. So form, again, is easy to show, hard to explain. And so I think another really good example is the difference between Paper Mario and regular Mario. Your favorite little Italian plumber guy, there's this really great series called Paper Mario where he is a two-dimensional form on a two-dimensional plane. And then there's all of the other Mario, and my favorite of those being Mario Sunshine, and he's a three-dimensional form in a three-dimensional world, even though we're seeing it on a two-dimensional plane. So I think that's a really good example of showing those two forms are just a bunch of shapes, but one has more shading, one has, you know, less shading, one has no like depth to it, it's just a piece of paper. So I think that's a wonderful example for form. Space is an interesting concept because it is shown both on two-dimensional and three-dimensional art, but used in kind of different ways. So space, when you're thinking about a really classical painting, would be considered, you know, you have people standing in the front, and then you have a space seeming to extend through the back of the painting. So, you know, say you're looking at a Jean Van Eyck, and there's two people standing, and then there's a hallway behind them. Space is that hallway that you see behind them as like an illusion. It's kind of like, when it's used in two-dimensional art, it's definitely an illusion and something that, you know, you have to study how to use perspective. I think space is a little bit harder to explain on a two-dimensional form, but I think with three-dimensional forms like sculpture, space is super easy to understand because, I don't know, let's see. So when we're looking at this, we see space right here. We see space surrounding, and then when we look at it from its front, we see that this is the front and this is the back because of its slope. So that's a really good way to explain space, and we can see the space between all of the flowers. We can see the space between me and the vase, and that's a really good way to show, like if you were to go to the Getty Museum and you were to look at some really classical sculptures, you can start to appreciate that a lot of those sculptures started out as a big block, and instead of creating shape, you took away shape to create the form. So you made space so that a form could appear. So I think one of the easiest parts of visual analysis to understand is line. Line is a moving point going from one point to the next, and that line that's made between it is a line. Like that is what a line is. It's a moving point. A lot of artists use it as a stylistic motive, and we're going to talk about kind of an example of that later. But I think another really important example of line is just the fact that it helps you move your eye throughout a painting. Or, you know, say that a sculpture was like posed like this. The line is the space that you see that's kind of like from my fingertip to my other fingertip that helps you move across this plane. And so I think that line is used a lot, very subtly. You barely ever even notice it, but it helps you move your eye from one space to another space so that you can get the full picture, but also so that you can appreciate the very little intricacies. So I think a good example of line being the focal point and the substance of a piece is, I don't know how to say his name quite well. It's Piet Mondrian, and the piece is Composition with Blue and Yellow. So this painting literally consists of 3 colors and black lines. That's the whole painting. I think it's one of the most beautiful, striking paintings because he uses line only vertically and horizontally, which create these beautiful right angles. And they are so crisp and they are so clean and beautiful that there's no other thing in nature but a straight line that could create something like that. When you first look at this painting, you might think that there's very little depth in talking about 3 colors and a bunch of black lines. But when you understand the care and the precision that an artist uses to make a painting so precise and pristine, you start to appreciate that maybe they had some other motive other than I just want to make a painting with 3 lines and black lines. I think that he uses this to have us kind of step back and understand how intensely beautiful the human mind is when we can create something so machine-like with our own hands. So the last thing we're going to talk about is composition. And composition is basically like the blueprint of a painting. So in this painting, or not painting, photograph, we see a clear triangle, and that would be considered its composition. So we would consider this like this triangle right here, or even this right angle right here, to be part of its composition. And I think another really good example of composition is Jean Van Eyck's Madonna and Chancellor Rollin. It is easy to tell if you look at his body of work that he is obsessed. We love an obsessed queen. We love a symmetrical queen. He loves doing everything super symmetrical. He loves doing everything with an equal balance to it. He places things so well on a page, on a painting, that it really helps you take in how good he was at his craft and how many elements he used and how everything was used symbolically and how everything was used to prove a point in a way. All of his paintings show really good composition because they're either, you know, 2 forms right here, they're triangles, or they're kind of like cattywampus rectangles, but they all have a specific like shape to them, which I think in especially modern art with like illustration and stuff, that can kind of get lost. So it's always interesting to go back and see what other artists have done that make it so interesting to look at composition. So I hope that next time that you walk into a museum or you're driving down the road and you see a mural, that you can begin to appreciate the work that went into making the piece. Maybe you'll see something you like and try to find more art like that. Maybe you dislike that art, and maybe that will drive you to find art that you do like. As long as you have an informed opinion, I think that is true justice for an artist, is to receive informed opinions about their art, and I think that validates their experience as an artist completely. And I think it validates your experience as a patron of an art museum or a patron of viewing a mural. I think that completely makes the experience complete, is to have an informed opinion whether you did or didn't like something. And so I hope the next time you walk into a museum, you enjoy yourself not because you like something, but because you have an opinion about it. Subscribe if you like this video, and leave a like or dislike. Those are also appreciated, obviously. And follow us on social media, and we'll have, if any links we use in the video, we'll definitely have them down below in the info box. Bye. Bye, Peach.
Cute.
Art, more like fart. Okay, so this week we're talking about art and how to look at it, why to look at it, and who to look at it. Make sure to come by this channel, like, sorry. Please subscribe, please. Subscribe. Just kidding.